Stephanie, thank you so much for your time for this quick conversation. Just as a warm up for Frontiers, it's a pleasure to have you and the research of CISR of MIT with us in the event. And it's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you, Pedro, for inviting me. I am really looking forward to Frontiers and can't wait to share the research that we've been doing.
Perfect. Thanks, Stephanie. And you know, it is worth explaining that the title of the event is "It's the future comes from the future." We do think, and it means that the future we build comes from the future we imagine. We're in a pretty interesting time where it's hard to think about the present, given the fact it's full of hardships and crises right now, and we need to create how we're going to come from it, how we're going to rise from it as individuals and of course as companies. We need to imagine it first, and we do think for a fact that many of the difficulties we're having in Brazil due to the coronavirus lockdown we're having right now, comes from the fact that our companies haven't been doing their homeworks regarding digital transformation or fourth industrial revolution. Of course, there's the lack of ventilators, there's a lack of tests, but I think there's some pretty menial situations we get ourselves into. Like, for example, yesterday I had to go out to sign a document and go to a notary's office, something that could be digital, So we do know, we believe that we haven't been doing our homework at all in Brazil regarding digital transformation. Do you share these thoughts? Is it different in the US? How are you thinking about it?
Well, it's somewhat similar in the US. I mean, there are still times that, yes, they're asking for a notary signature, and you just have to say, do you not? We have the infrastructure. We have the ability to do this, but are companies actually putting that infrastructure into place? And are they spending the time to learn how to work with that new infrastructure? And I think that this is probably common across the globe right now, is that you have lots of companies and countries who are have all of a sudden had to change the way that they work, and they've been thinking about what kind of infrastructure they need. And in fact, they may have been putting some of it into place, but because digital business transformation is difficult and they haven't gotten as far along, they're really kind of stuck with where they are. So we know that, say, creating a single source of truth for your data is really, really important. And that becomes even more important when all of your employees are distributed and you want them to come to one place to get the data because they can't get to many places to get the data. So I think that this is going to accelerate some parts of the transformation. Also, you see it in terms of work. A lot of companies have not wanted to work from home or work outside of the office because they weren't sure, how do you manage? This means that you've got have to have a whole different kind of leadership. And it hasn't been imperative, but now it is imperative. So I think that you're seeing it in Brazil, but I think we're also seeing it here in the US. I think some companies that are further along their transformation, or those that have really set things up, are adapting somewhat easier. But honestly, we also have a lot of things that you can't make digital. So one thing that this crisis has shown us is that for the things that can really be helped by a digital transformation with a digital infrastructure, we should be going all out, because the things that can't be done, for instance, I just had my water heater break in my house. Well, you don't want to go very far without hot water, but you are not digitally going to replace a hot water heater. You actually have to have people there. And so you want to make it as safe as possible for those people to come in. So you don't want to have people doing something that could be accomplished digitally and having extra touches during this pandemic.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And you know what? Thinking it in a more macro level, apart from the business, I think it's a consensus right now that the economy is going to be hit pretty badly in this moment we're living. probably, there's a lot of sectors that depend on the Dutch, depend on people going there, but also there's a lot of revenue being lost, definitely because of lack of digital transformation or lack of digitization of the products of the companies and so forth. And so how do you think that the research you're doing at MIT and the CISR is doing at MIT about the digital economy relates to those economic challenges? Do you think working in a more digital way could be a way to ease in our recovery period?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about it. Think about, one of the things is this is a virus that is very contagious. So suppose you can have people work digitally and take them out of the day-to-day people touching type of workforce and have them working and building up. That gives your people who have to be there, like my water heater repair people, a little bit more flexibility, a little bit more slack, because they are not coming in contact with people who really could be doing their work inside the house or in a very safe space. So absolutely, digital is keeping parts of the economy moving, but it's a real problem. I mean, we see the role of government too in helping us navigate this crisis, and you can see, at least in the United States, where they haven't invested in certain areas for digital, and it makes it difficult to figure out how you're going to contact the right people and how you're going to get them payments and how you're actually going to get the work done. And so I think that companies that have been thinking about this are going to be in a little bit better space than companies that have really been trying to keep going with the same old ways that they've been working.
And Stephanie, as you make a lot of research about the healthcare system at CISR and healthcare companies in general, is there any explanation or in your research about why wasn't we prepared, or why wasn't the healthcare system or healthcare companies wasn't best prepared for what's going on? Because, for example, we posted an article in our blog that says that makers, the maker space is doing great things, but it didn't talk to physicians or manufacturers at all. So probably those inventions aren't going to be used. So, how are you seeing how the healthcare system, healthcare sector in general, is reacting to this? And
so we haven't specifically looked at healthcare, but I've been doing some data analysis on a new survey that we just completed. And healthcare is one of the areas where they are, at least in the results of our survey, they're less further along in their transformation. They're more fragmented in some ways, and they're not spending, their level of spending is less on average than some other companies. Now, I don't think it's fully healthcare's fault. I mean, there are a lot of government regulations that really affect healthcare. And so, for instance, the makers can get things done, but then if you have regulations about what kind of materials you can use, and do you have to go through a testing system? What we haven't done is tried to figure out how we create this ecosystem. Like in financial services, you have fintech, you have all of these startups trying to figure out new ways of doing things. I think healthcare, with its extra layer of need for confidentiality and privacy, and extra layer of regulations, it's much, much more difficult for them to get those innovations out. But at the same time, I don't know how it is in Brazil, but in the United States, for instance, we have a number of different healthcare record systems. Well, that means that you don't have systems talking to each other. It means that how are you going to share best practices if they can't talk to each other? And that hasn't been as much of a issue until now. where you want to figure out, well, what did they do well on the West Coast that we could learn from on the East Coast, or something like that. And so I think this is where you're starting to see some real issues happening up, is that digitization is probably harder in healthcare because of the needs for privacy, confidentiality, security of the data. But at the same time, it's also quite fragmented, and we haven't figured out what are the important pieces that should be common among the different kinds of companies.
Yeah, it's actually the same in Brazil. It's not
Is it?
that much of a difference. It's really fragmented. And I do think that there's a second layer of need for digitization in the healthcare sector. Is in Brazil, telemedicine wasn't possible before this crisis. You know, that it was the coronavirus crisis that got the need for telemedicine to move forward, and regulators start to think that it was important.
Well, what we've had in the United States is, because of the way that our healthcare system is set up, we have private insurance companies, and private insurance companies would not pay for telemedicine. Well, now it's much, much safer to have telemedicine for those simple kinds of things that you need to ask your physician. And so this is actually forcing a change. And that actually may be something that we see as longstanding and staying on after the virus has been extinguished, or at least dealt with, is that you might start to see telemedicine become available. And it might be really good for the whole population, because there might be people where this would be the way that they interacted with their doctors, and perhaps we can start to change our healthcare system because of that.
Yeah, and the costs go way down, which is a big issue for healthcare systems right now, right?
Well, and especially in the United States, we have a lot of people who use emergency rooms as their healthcare. Well, suppose they could call somebody for some of these questions rather than going to an emergency room. Your cost would go way down. Plus, you have an opportunity then to create a relationship between a patient and a doctor that, the way the system's set up now, you can't do that. And then, as I said, with the fragmented healthcare records, you can't keep track of people. So there's some real opportunity here.
Amazing.
A lot of pain, but real opportunity.
Yeah, it's part of the issue, right? You need to have pain to perceive those opportunities. I think this current crisis we're going on right now is teaching us that, right? Without it, we were probably going to postpone some of those decisions 5 years, 10 years from now. So maybe it's not all that bad that we're passing through moments of that need adaptation, right? So
well, yeah, but it is hard. I mean, many people are really struggling with isolation, and I had to teach my mother how to use Zoom. But she really likes it now. So we've started having a weekly family meeting, but otherwise she would be much more isolated because she didn't know how to use that. So yes, for some people this is a very, very difficult time.
So Stephanie, of course, I don't want we could spend hours talking about different aspects of everything that's going on right now, but since you will be with us at the event by the start of May, the last question I wanted to ask you, maybe to summarize everything we've been talking so far, is what do you think? Maybe thinking the first answer that comes to mind. What do you think a business leader could do right now to prepare for the recovery, and maybe to make the business survive until then, from what your research has been discovering?
So what can they do to prepare for the recovery? Well, one is, I would say, really turn a really good eye inside your company and say, so what are we doing really well? And is this something that we can bring forward and learn from and maybe build on in the future? Because one of the things that we say about a digital transformation is to, there are a couple of ways that you could go about it. One is to say, what are you really great at? And then build on that, leverage that. Or the second is find something that you're really terrible at and just attack it. But I think that what this crisis is showing us is that there are pockets in your company that are really adapting very well. What are they doing? How are they learning to work? What are some of the best practices that you can take from them? And then how do you get this throughout the whole company? One of the things that we see for top leaders is that there's a real need to move from a command and control. And one thing that this virus has shown us is you're not going to command or control it. You really have to adapt and figure out how you're going to kind of deal with it. To a coach and communicate. And I think as a top leader, you really want to be looking at how are you going to coach your people? What kind of practices can you take from the people who've become quite adaptive and move that throughout the whole organization? The other thing that I would say is look for your weaknesses. So first we've looked at the strength, but where are your weaknesses? Is your data spread throughout the whole organization? Or do you have very fragmented processes? And are there one or two processes that you could really streamline and make end to end that are going to make work easier for your people? So, and then the final thing is, what do your customers need? So we've talked about kind of, efficiency, and we've talked about what your people need and how you learn from them. But then what do your customers need? Do you see anything that your customers, are they wanting different products? Are there different ways that you could engage them? You can't, anybody who's had to do, stop, doing face-to-face, well, how have you changed? Can you keep that moving? Can you digitize that? Can you make a new channel? I think that if you can stop, breathe, and not let yourself get cognitively narrow, but try to look and be creative, you might see a lot of things that could be done differently and more effectively that you might not have thought about before.
Definitely. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. A lot of sense. And well, I guess for many of those ideas on how to act creatively to this, everything is going on, people will need to be with us by the beginning of May in Frontiers. And I'm really, really grateful for your time, Stephanie, for your knowledge. And well, we'll see each other again pretty soon on Frontiers in May. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I can't wait. I think this is going to be a great opportunity to talk and learn from each other.